Good evening and welcome to Dog Talk. I'm Dan Camilleri.
And I'm Laura McKillop. We'd like to start by thanking Enduro for their ongoing support in bringing you our live weekly Q&A. Tonight we're fortunate enough to be speaking with Lance Clifford from Le Cliff Kelpies.
Lance will be picking who he thinks has asked the best question of the night, and they will win a bag of Enduro high-energy food for working dogs with real kangaroo meat.
Hey Lance, how you going?
Pretty good, thanks, Laura. Hello, Dan.
That's the way.
G'day, mate. How was the day in sunny Tasmania, mate?
It wasn't very sunny. It was a bit cool this morning for most of the day till the sun came out for an hour or two in the afternoon. But it's been fairly wet the last few days, and a bit cold. Even some snow in some parts of the state today.
Oh, really?
Oh, wow.
Bit unusual for this time of the year. This late, it should be more summery weather.
Yeah, definitely.
Whereabouts are you, mate?
I'm towards the north of the state, about a half hour east of Launceston.
Yep. And have you always been in Tassie?
I've always lived in Tassie, grew up at St Helens on the east coast, and from there ventured out, spent 30 years in the post, working all around the northern and southern and middle of the state, and then moved to Pine bought a farm there, which is just a bit away from St Helens, and farmed there for about 34 years. So I've not always been a working dog. Well, I always had dogs, but had to earn some money at times.
And what did you do on the farm there, mate? What did you have?
Well, it started off with a couple of hundred acres at near St Helens. Bought that off at Sunny Bush, bought it off 10 shillings an acre and 33-year term to pay for it. We'd like that sort of money these days, wouldn't we? There's only second-class ground, but anyway, that gave me I just had a few sheep and a few cattle there and cleared up slowly, and then saw an opportunity to move further inland onto a bit of good soil, but fairly flood-prone country at Pine It was dairying country, really, but I ran fat lamb ewes and a few beef cattle there when I was there, and used to probably have to take on another job on the side to make ends meet, but so it kept us busy.
You mentioned you were a postie for
4 years ago. I worked in the post. I started off, did 3 years riding a bike around St Helens, delivering mail and telegrams, and then graduated onto beef staff and counter work to be postmaster. I think when I was about 27, I was postmaster and stayed in the job till I was about, 45 or something like that. Went on a trip over to Canada and took 3 dogs over there and worked in a trial there. And when I come back, I thought, well, gee, I don't really want to go back to work. So I rang up and told them I'm not coming back and got out. And about the time, it was just a bit after I'd bought the farm a couple of years later, but as soon as I got that was when they had the financial crash around the 90s. So it wasn't a very good time to have a good paying job. But anyway, I used to ask me how I survived. The taxation department said, you make no money and you don't get any benefits, what do you survive on? I had to tell him a bigger mortgage and overdraft every year. But I used to take jobs as well. I took on bought a truck and was carting some calves and livestock out of Pine and then bought a silage wrapper and was wrapping silage for a few years. So made ends meet along the way.
Whatever it took to make ends meet, mate.
That's about what it is.
And you mentioned that you had dogs while you were still working at the post office?
Yeah, I had dogs before I went in the post office. I probably had my first dog when I was about 12-year-old, and they always had dogs. When I was in the post, I had this block of ground that I was playing around with, and I guess I never really got into. I was just mongrel bred dogs, but they did a job. I used to do a fair bit of driving about on the dog and the push bike on the roads and that sort of thing when I was probably 13, 14. But probably about 69, I happened to buy a Kelpie from a chap over in Victoria off the Liscannah stud, and that got me started in dogs. I started trialling, but I found out I'd broken it in the wrong way initially to go trialling. So then I had to get a couple more and end up with another 3 dogs from Liscannor Stud at the time, and those all proved pretty good little trial dogs. So
And
then I was sort of trialling. Yes, Laurie?
I was just going to say, where did your passion straight up come from for the dogs and livestock?
Oh, we'd always had some livestock about, and I had dogs. I used to help on a farm after school and that sort of thing to make a bit of pocket money. And you need a dog quite often to do things. Later on, I guess, when I started in the post office, actually I was in Hobart working, I think, when I got my first Kelpie. I decided to get it and sort of just wanted one better than the next fella I had. So actually, I think I wrote to Tim Austin at the time, but he didn't get back to me. Then I picked up on the Liscannor Stud and got dogs from there, and I found that they all turned out pretty good. So that was probably where I was lucky. At that time, a lot of people got some pretty good dogs with a Liscannor blood in them.
And why did you chase a Kelpie at that time?
Oh, to be different. All the trial fellas were working border collies, so I chased Kelpies, and well, perhaps they beat me now, but I was telling, they tell me to get a border collie, and I tell them, they ought to get a Kelpie and show me how good a work they are. I said, any mug can win a trial for border collie. So try doing it with a Kelpie.
And when you're talking trials, you mean 3 sheep trials?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I sort of I prefer them to the yard dog trials, even though I started the yard dog trials off back in 1980, running the first one. But
Yeah, wow.
yeah, I just enjoy I think there's probably a bit more finesse in the free sheep trialling game than there is in the yard trialling. But still, people these days are getting it down pretty well off pat, the yard dog trialling, and they go pretty well with chaps that get into it. But yeah, I just prefer the different type of dog if you're going to go free sheep trialling, and he's a bit harder to find these days too, because people are rushing into the good yard dogs, and there's not too many breeding for the really good outside dog. That's my belief.
Yeah.
If you can tell me where there's a good outside dog or two, I might go there to get one.
That's cool, mate. And we'll touch on trying a little bit more a little bit later. Do you have any hobbies or something outside of working dogs that you used to toy with, or is working dogs your hobby these days? Or
When I was younger, I was playing football, cricket, tennis,
badminton.
We used to do a fair bit of hunting at the times and spotlighting and that of the night time, but that was to help feed the dogs. So we did have some hunting dogs too, myself and a mate. I used to take a Kelpies at first, and they were pretty good hunting dogs, but worried somebody might be a bit quick on the trigger if they see a little red dog coming out of a bush, mistaken for a little wallaby or something. So I thought I'd better get a team that were dispensable. I've always had, I guess, when I got into dogs, I just sort of had occupied a fair bit of my time.
Yeah. And has your passion for your dogs and livestock passed down through to your kids and grandkids?
No, I don't think so. I wouldn't advise any of them to take it up. I think people get into it, that they get interested, but you don't want to push people into those sort of things.
Yeah.
They reckon I'm wasting my time. I probably am at the moment.
And obviously you've been around and seen a lot of people handle stock for, what you mentioned back trialing in the 80s there, nearly 40 years. Have you noticed a change in the way people handle stock these days compared to when back in the day?
Yeah, well, I started trialing back in the 70s, early 70s. I've probably been around there for 50 or more years. I think I've noticed a change in the dogs. People making dogs more, they're turning them more to a T. Whereas I think going back when I first started, people had more natural sheepdogs. But I think they get around now with a lot of them were little fluffy white dogs that the sheep seem to like. And one of them will probably get a run at the trial. But I'd prefer to see a normal black and white border collie than the white ones. But yes, some people, I don't know, I've seen people that are very good trainers. And then you see the odd one, Malcolm Taylor over here, he's now deceased, but he used to be, didn't think he was a very good trainer, but he just seemed to have a knack of working. He'd send his dogs down, bring them up the peg, around the peg, and off he'd go, around the obstacles without getting any confrontation. But other people had trained their dogs to back off and play about the sheep. I always thought it was better to like to see the person that just got on with the job.
And you mentioned your first dog there a little while ago. Do you remember what he was?
First dog? Oh, I was working on this farm, helping milk and that sort of things, and weekends, doing odd jobs. And a little pup wandered from the farm next door, about probably half a kilometre to nearly a kilometre away. He's probably only 8 or 9 weeks old. And he wandered over, I don't know how or what brought him over to this other farm. So anyway, I took him back and said to the bloke, "Do you want him or could I have him?" And he gave him to me. He turned, and I named him Prince, so I was going to have a flash dog and a flash name. Anyway, because he wasn't going very well, everybody was stirring me about him. I then called him, what do they call him? Rook. I said I'd been taken down, so I called him Rook. But he was a pretty good little dog on the roads and that, because he'd follow me all weekend. I'd be riding a push bike and he'd always, wherever I was going, he'd always come. And even to the stage when if I was away and didn't go to the farm to milk overnight, he'd always leave home and go over there and check it out because he's used to doing that every day. And but he was a good dog. He probably none of the style of these others. He'd go around a mob and go woof woof at them, but he turned them round and we had he understood what up the bank. We could get out there in the swamp and get the cows out of the swamp. He'd do whatever you wanted him to do, and you could take him hunting over the weekend, and he was as good as any of the hounds and that other people were taking.
Sounds like he just loved you and did anything for you.
Well, some dogs do pretty good. They sort of enjoy your company and doing things.
So, what type of style of work dog do you prefer now, and has that changed from when you began?
Oh, no, I suppose the first Kelpie I got was a paddock dog, and I've always looked for paddock dogs that that are trial, fairly correct dogs. So I suppose it's which is a hard part these days to find them. I've stuck along with my own breed lines, but an outcross here and there. Used to be when I had more dogs. I used to sometimes send a bitch away to get a pup back or something like that. I've even sent dogs away and to get a pup back because we had that bit of water between us, which always made it a bit difficult to get what we wanted. But I used to work on the principle. I sent someone a bitch, maybe an older bitch, get a pup back. They did the first cross, and then I could get back to my strain and probably, might be able to improve it a bit. Because I think all dogs that it's a lot to do with how much effort you put into it. As I think of the Kelpies, even if there's an outstanding dog here and there, but they're never going to, people say we're breeding better and better. I don't think you can say that. I think you get the outstanding dog and you breed from him and they come back to the level of the general dogs in the end. So I don't think, we're never going to keep going ahead. I think when you look at the dogs that were about 30 years ago, there were good dogs about then, there's good dogs about now. The only thing is, the Kelpie trial, I know when they ran the first Kelpie trial, there's probably 3 dogs out of 50 got through the yards. That's how poor the dogs were. But people gradually, they had training schools and they learnt and watched and put the effort in. Dogs got better, whereas now most of them are getting hold of their sheep and working them quite well.
Yeah.
And obviously, being over there, and you mentioned before, it's not easy getting over the ditch, right? Did you find? How to say? Did you find you guys had like a small genetics pool, and it's just been added to over the years, or was there a stage where you went, no, we need to go back to the mainland to get more dogs, or how do you think that? How do you see that happening or happened?
Oh, well, there's been, we've found over the years some dogs here. I guess at one time I had a fair few dogs that I'd bred and had bought. And I had dogs, I wanted to keep for breeding out on farms near where I was, which give me more scope. It's only when I sort of cut back on dogs the last 10 or 15 years, when you haven't got the numbers, you soon run into a dead end with nowhere to go. All your dogs are too close.
Yeah.
But I didn't really have a lot of trouble early, because when you have a good dog, there's a lot of people sending bitches to you, so you could always get a pup back, so you could keep it going pretty well.
Yeah.
But I've got myself down to half a dozen dogs now, and they're all fairly closely related, so I don't have many places to go.
And is there a few of you that sort of, keep your genetics close within Tasmania, or is everyone sort of separate?
We're probably all separate, there's a few people very keen on the yard trials, and of course their dogs probably, there might be some dogs there that might suit me. I haven't looked closely at them all. Like, you're not going to tell in a yard dog trial, but I haven't seen something really standing out. There's a couple of players on the mainland I think could probably have a dog that'd suit. But I've been able to manage so far, but I'm nearly probably I don't need to breed many more dogs.
Yeah.
If I just get the use out of the ones I've got, it might be enough for me.
And back when you did have your farm, what was the country like, and did it require a particular type of dog?
Well, the first place I had I bought off the Crown was bush, and so he was looking for a dog that would go and muster for sheep, and the ones I'd had was kind of, I found you could trust them away. You put them on scent and go home and come back to the sheep at the gate later in the day. Pick the sheep up and poke them along. Probably I haven't got dogs like that now, but I haven't got the work like that either. So you don't, without the work experience, they don't develop. Probably those sort of dogs, first time they go out, they might make a bit of a mess of it, but they learn how to handle the runs in bush country. And where I used to work, when I used to work for a farmer back when I was still going to school, they used to have a lot of run country on the coast. A lot of boobialas over here, and sheep be out on the plains feeding. But if you sent your dog, you couldn't talk or yell, because the sheep would go straight into the boobiala and you'd never get them. So you'd have to rely on your dog to cast out round them with no one letting know and get behind them before they knew it to catch them. And that was probably a good experience for working dogs, with dogs to work that could work themselves and do the right thing.
Yeah.
But the
What
first
about
dog,
the
he used
terrain?
to go around with terrain.
You go. Sorry.
It was reasonably flat terrain. The places we were at there, it's just when we was gathering the runs on the coast, you could go to the sandy, overgrown stuff or boobialas, a swamp. The only time I ever come off a horse was the old farmer said to me, "We can get through this crossing here, it's not too deep." And I was riding, got out there, he reckons it's a bit deep, and he rolled over and left me in it. Anyway, when I got back, got him onto the side and got back on, he decided he'd go down the flat to bucking and carrying on for a while, and so that soon dried me out.
Yeah, I bet. Who'd have horses, eh?
Well, we don't seem to have them these days, but I guess
No,
they were good.
no.
You have a sheep, and to work a dog off because you could see what was going on,
Yeah.
and you could get there a bit quicker too.
Yep.
Yeah. And back then, when you were working, what were you looking for in your own line of dogs?
Well, I guess I got the first one from Liz Canna, and that was a good little dog. Oh, she'd back and bark. In fact, I even had her one day. I went somewhere and the farmer, he wanted to get a pup from me or something like that, and I had another dog there and was having a look at these, putting some cattle through a race. And he had them there, and he said, I give him a hand to get them in the yard. And then he said, gee, it'd be good if we had a dog that would back them. And these were probably, 15 or 18-month-old yearlings. And I said, I reckon she'd go over the back of them. Just said to her, get up there. She went over and backed right up to the front over these cattle.
Yeah,
You
wow.
just had confidence in you, and I think that's a big thing with dogs. Ask them to do something. If they've got the confidence, they probably will do it if you know them. But I just like those dogs, and that's why I've bought, I must have probably had half a dozen dogs from Liz Canna there. And I had a couple from Bert Bonham, who had a stud there. I'm trying to think what his stud name was, Glenville. And they were pretty good little dogs too.
And were you chasing a team of similar dogs, or did you like to have a bit of different work styles and abilities within that team?
Oh, I guess when you breeding dogs, you're going to get a little bit of variation from them. I was finding those dogs, the time was suiting me. I suppose I did a bit more work with dogs then than I do these days. But I found I had a fairly good team, half a dozen dogs and a couple of, or two or three really good ones.
Beautiful.
And who were the most influential dogs to yourself? Or did you have one that stood out for you?
I suppose Liz Canna Pace was above most of them. He was good. He'd work sheep or cattle, back and bark, or he'd work it. He won 21 free sheep trials, and
Oh, wow.
he was probably in Tasmania. I guess that over the 3 or 4 years when he was at his top, he was probably the best dog in Tasmania, where he was working against border collies all the time, and he was winning himself more than any of the others of people were winning with a team of dogs.
Yeah.
And he was probably
Pretty
way
big
ahead.
achievement.
And one of his sons was probably not quite as good a trial dog. He wanted to always wanted to push a bit or in a hurry, but he ran third, I think, in the National Kelpie Trial one year up in Sydney. One year went pretty well. He'd ran fifth in the Australasian Sheepdog Championship one year, made the final, and he was always up there roundabout. He'd been in the yard dog finals and won a yard dog trial somewhere. But he's probably a bolder nature than Pace, so different sort of stocks. If the stock were hard, or tough, he would go well at it. Pace
Did
was
you
probably
say?
a bit of that.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right.
Yeah, no, did you say the National Kelpie Field Trial in Sydney then?
Yeah, that has one up there. I forget the name of the place now in Sydney back, 90s or somewhere like that. Would it be 90s?
Yeah, wow.
Or 99?
So we're not that far out of Sydney here, and I wasn't aware there was a National Kelpie Field Trial ever out this way.
There's a farm out there, a city farm or something like that. It was on. I can't think of the name of the place now.
Fairfield City Farm, Carnsley City Farm.
Sorry,
Carnsley City Farm.
That's it. Carnsley, yeah, that's the one.
Wow.
I was there. Jim Luce was there with Sam and
yep, First Creek Sam.
Chris Taber there with Target, I think.
Target, yep.
And I was there. I had Pete there. He won the novice and he ran third in the Open. Probably wasn't much between the three of them in the Open. It was just whoever got the best luck of the sheep, I think.
That would have been the first and the last around there, I reckon.
Definitely.
I wasn't aware of that. That's pretty cool.
Yeah. No, I flew up there with one dog, and some of the boys there was having a beer after the trial one night there. "Gee, what are you doing coming up here with one dog?" I said, "Well, if your best ain't good enough, why bring the rest?"
Yeah, that's actually that's actually pretty good philosophy, mate. And even to travel that far, and there's still one or two trials around that will do that with one dog and still go fairly well. One that comes to mind to me is Toomsy. He hasn't got George now; he's retired George, but he'd rock up out somewhere with one dog and do fairly well. But I suppose George wasn't just an ordinary dog either, was he?
You probably go better when you only have one. You get two and you haven't got the time to fill in on them. So, but there is a thing going for you when you get 2 or 3 dogs going, that you get confidence because you get a good run out of one, you got nothing to lose with the next one, so you can really have a go. Whereas if you've only got one dog, you strike a bit of bad luck, you get down the mouth a bit. So that's what I found. By when you had a team going, you could get confident. I had a dog up here once that he'd been out on the farm all his life. I got him in one Friday and took him to trial Saturday. He went and ran 86 and won the novice trial, and I never ever took him to another trial. But it was just, and actually he beat pace that day in the score.
Yeah, right.
And it was my fault, I think. I knew the faults of the dog, so I give him a bit of start. Whereas you didn't help the other dog, you relied on him doing it himself. So I found you could help a dog sometimes, and sometimes we're probably remiss. We should have helped the dogs more.
And I was just going to say, is there one of those old dogs you'd love to have back now?
Be very interesting if I had Pace back on the trial ground. I don't know if the sheep are really the same or different. We used to work a lot of weathers those days, and they'd probably try and run. Once you caught them, then they'd try and fight you. And if you survive all that, they'd probably travel pretty well for you. But the sheep these days are often working, or we are over here working ewes or old ewes or something like that, and they seem to get fairly trotty and keep trotting along. And we don't get really good trial sheep, I don't think, as we used to.
So you mean like trickier trial sheep?
I think the old ewes are. They probably draw you out of position to get up the side to stop them, and they turn away from you. Wethers that tend to face up to you probably. But some places still have wethers, but we're getting caught finding good sheep these days, and the way they're handled too, I guess.
And obviously you've been around a fair while now and seen a stack of dogs, and you mentioned some fairly handy dogs and handlers just prior there. Was there a dog that you would have loved to inherit back in your day in somebody else's camp?
There's another Liscana dog. There was a couple who were pretty good. I liked Marco, which
Steve Wayman.
Trying to think of his name. Up country there and New South Wales.
Steve Wayman?
No, not Steve Wayman. No, Steve Wayman had Mac, Mac was by this dog.
By Marco, yeah, sorry,
It was kind of Marco. I can't think of his name, but anyway, he's a pretty good handler, but he didn't do much, didn't stay in dogs very much, but Marco was a good all-round dog. I think Malcolm Peake, he had a couple of dogs there, the ones were fairly good dogs.
Yeah.
There's sort of other dogs, I probably have seen enough of them. Sort of some of the older dogs when we had Ted Rutland and John Body, and old John White. There's a number of dogs about there that were fairly handy dogs.
Yeah.
I don't know whether we've got those number of dogs going around the free sheep trials that we did back in those days in the early 70s.
Yeah.
Question here from Tristan Lyons. On what you've just said there, he's asked, what are the Kelpie lines that are more suited to 3 sheep trials, in your opinion?
Oh, well, they're hard to find. There's Gary White's always seemed to have a good Kelpie going, and he had one there, fella, which undoubtedly he's won a fair bit, was pretty good. Gary's a good handler too. It's hard to find a lot. I haven't been around that much the last 10 years either, travelling. But I think last time I was over there somewhere, Rhonda O'Connell had a very nice little Kelpie bitch. She ran second probably at Henty, I think it was, and somewhere else. It might have been at the Koroit or somewhere later in the big trial. She had a nice little dog that time going around and stood out.
And have you still got
it's hard to
Kelpies
find.
in your...
Sorry?
Yeah. No, sorry, mate. I was gonna say, do you still? What's your pack? You said you have half a dozen dogs there at the moment. What do you have in your pack?
Sort of one bitch that's been not really trained for much. She's not nice moving bitch. It gets ahead and a little bit soft on sheep, but I kept her. I liked the way she worked for a bitch. I've got a dog there. He was by mating. I got to a mainland dog, Halstead's Johnny, which a fellow over here had bought, and he'd been breeding probably utility dogs with him or yard dogs with him. But I bred him to a bitch I had and come up with a couple of nice bitches. I think I did have 3 dogs there at one time. The dog didn't set anything alight, but the 2 bitches were pretty good and neat and tidy. And then I must have had a pup out of one of those, which I then mated to a bitch of Chris Stapleton's. I got a pretty good little dog back out of that trial pretty well. He made the Henty top 20 and he made top 20 at the Supreme that year. He was a nice moving dog. Yes, but don't quite know where I'd go to get what I want at the moment.
And you still got all Kelpies in your team?
They're all Kelpies, yeah. I've got 2 pups about 6 months old because I was fairly involved with organising the last Supreme and that. I didn't get round to breaking them in yet, so they're ready and waiting. Don't know that they're going to be trial dogs, though. I'm a bit unsure about that. They're by an old dog that was by a dog of mine. And then I've got a 18-month-old one. I like him. He's got a nice grip. He gets a grip of the sheep and fairly soft. I probably need to get into him and get sides on him now and put some work into him. The other dog I've got 7 or 8 year old, but he's a main go-to dog at the moment. He's probably better around the place than he is in the sheepdog trials. He probably wants to do a bit much, and probably I've spoiled him. He's a handy dog around the place. I've got another dog too. He's fairly rough, but he's out of the litter I liked, and I bred her a pups by a brother, and then I've sold him and kept this one. He's something in him. You can lean on him, and he's still facing up to you and wanting to work a sheep. And I find, sometimes when you've got putting a bit of pressure on a dog, I don't want him to turn and go back, whereas this fella's standing up and facing up, and I know he's plenty strong enough. I just didn't come along about when I was moving house, and I didn't get the work into him that I should have done. And I made a mistake. I kept 3 out of the litter, which meant I was never.
There's a question here from Marty Campbell. Earlier you mentioned that you found you were breaking your dogs in the wrong way for trialing. So he's asking, what is your ideal method to break a dog in for trialing?
Well, I've never been really one for the round yard. I only got a round yard. Bought one here off a chap who was given up trialing back probably a couple of years ago. But I've only reared a couple of dogs through there. Just a small paddock, as usually. I like to give them a little bit of room. I suppose it depends a lot on the type of dog you've got or your confidence in your dog. Plenty of pups, if you could, I might think he's got what I want. I'm prepared to take him out in the paddock and let him have a go on a few quieter sheep, 9 or 10. If you're unsure of something, well, he's probably better in a smaller yard or in a round yard till you get control of him. But shouldn't ask me that question. I don't have enough time into breaking my dogs. I tend to take them out to do something and want to move pretty quickly with them. But it's probably not the right way. You should probably spend more time just to plant about with them.
Well, you must have done something right with Pace.
Yeah, well, I think he's about my third dog. I carried him about a lot, and he was the sort of dog, you could get to do whatever you wanted. He's there, willing. Like he, used to be playing cricket with my son, out there fielding the ball. He loved, getting involved in those sort of things. And then he's in a movie one time, 6 weeks in a movie, and he had to attack someone one night under lights, and the chap was going to fire off a flintlock pistol or something like that at the time while the attack was on. Anyway, Pace went, when I told him to get hold of the fella, he went in and was worrying him. He wouldn't sink a teeth, but he'd worry you. And anyway, then they said to me, "Oh, can you get him off? That's enough." So anyway, I called him off and then take my eye off him. He'd come off about 10 yards. The fella's just getting up off the ground. He dived back in and bowled him over again. I said, "We wanted that, but we weren't going to ask for it." He's the dog I used to play with him. He used to jump at me and I'd push him off with my arm, and it got to be a real game, and he sort of enjoyed it. And that's how I knew I could. Well, when I went they come looking for someone to go in the film, and somehow they got to me. Anyway, I went round for an audition after this trial, and when I got there, they said he attacked someone. And I said, "Well, you come outside on the lawn there and I'll show you." And they said, "No, we're not paid for that." So I got the job, but nobody ever attacked.
Did they still have the
Anyway,
cameras rolling on the second time?
Yeah. It's still on there.
Awesome.
It's in the movie Manganini. It's about the last of the Aborigines over in Tasmania.
Yeah,
And
rightio.
there's the Aborigine woman and a girl who got lost in the bush with an 8 or 9 year old girl. It might have been 7, I'm not too sure. And the dog sort of was a company. They found the dog, and the dog accompanied them around for 6 weeks. So the first week of shooting, I used to put Pace in there and move him up to the prime spot to get him the best picture of him. And mostly people in the film industry who if they've got the dog in the picture, that's good. We better go while he's there. They used to have some pretty poor dogs, but yeah, they woke up after a week or two. They said, "Can you make him less prominent?" They realised I was pushing him in to get the best shot all the time. Anyway, it must have done him good. We had 6 weeks away filming, moving around Tasmania, and the weekend we finished. I think it finished on the Thursday. On the Saturday, sheepdog trial, and ran 100 with him.
Oh, wow.
So it must have worked pretty well.
He must have enjoyed his time acting.
Yeah, I think he did, because we were staying around all the flash hotels and was in the national park, no dogs allowed. He was allowed. The only thing was, when I first started on the job, I was in Hobart and had a hotel booked out for us. And they said to me, "Oh, you got to take him in your room." I said, "I'm not taking him in my room. I don't have dogs in the house. Not used to having dogs in the house." He used to sleep. He'd sleep on the floor of a car, and you'd leave him in the car on the front floor. He would never move from there. He wouldn't look out the window or anything. He'd stay on the floor, and he'd probably travelled a fair few miles like that when I was moving about.
Yeah.
And do you think the amount of time you spent with him and becoming mates and developing that bond was a testament to how good he went for you?
I think all helps. I sort of got him as a 4 or 5 month old pup, and I was leading him about with the trials and that sort of thing till he's 8 months old. Never let him go off the lead. He's 8 months old. I think I was in the post office still then. I had a month's leave, and I thought, well, I better break him in. So I spent a month I was out St Helens where there was a bit of a farm, was rough farm, and a few mates out there, and you'd go around and visit your mates and give your dog a run on their sheep and on place, and sort of at the end of a month, I had him ready to go trialling, and he was running really good trials from with a month's training.
Yeah,
Awesome.
And I took him on a tour of the mainland when he was 15 months old, and he went pretty well then too.
And how much time would you put into training into the dogs you have now?
Me, I train once a month.
Yeah.
Take it very well. Yeah, not spending much time. I give him a run night and morning, but we haven't been doing much training. There always seems to be another job. As soon as I finish this job, I'm going to go and train my dogs, but there seems to be another job lines up somewhere. But I guess, one time I was working at Beaconsfield. I was postmaster down there, and I had a mate there, retired. I got to know he had a farm. Anyway, he's interested in dogs, so I used to go down and chase his sheep around every night, and then I'd take my dogs for a long run every morning behind the car. Those days there weren't that much traffic about on some of the bush roads. You could do those sort of things, but I thought it was probably always, when I was doing that, I was always dreaming if I had my own farm, I'd be able to work my dogs more. But I think afterwards I found out when I had my own farm, first of all, I was at the post office at St Helens, half an hour away, and you'd be travelling to work. You'd have to go around and do some farm work, check your lambs and all that in the morning. And then 8 o'clock, get in quick in the shower and then get to St Helens on the job, and get home at 6 o'clock and then have to rush around and check a sheep again, or do something summertime. There'd be other jobs to do. But so it's not, I suppose, you spent, when I was chasing the other chap's sheep, it was the best way to go. If you chase their sheep, you go home, you don't have to crutch them, drench them, move them about or feed them. That's probably the best way to train.
Definitely. What age do you normally go about starting your pups?
Oh, I'd like to see them about 4 to 5 months old. I think don't see a lot of people getting them out at 6 weeks of age. Doesn't really show what they're going to be, and I think you're probably more inclined that they're going to be chasers and that sort of thing. I'd rather see them big enough to sort of go out and work properly and use their brain, and just go out and yap and chase, and that'll sell pups. If you want to sell pups, get them out there early doing something and people will rush them, but I think you might be better. Well, it proves with pace, leave them till 8 months, just socialise them about and that sort of thing. It's probably got to calm a dog and let them work a natural way, rather than, I think you can easily get faults in young dogs. They're not quick enough to get round the sheep and end up chasing, or getting in too close and or jammed in the corner. Lots of things can happen.
Yep.
And doing fairly well in your outside work in trialing with your Kelpies. I presume you had fairly good control. How did you go about putting a sit on your dogs or a stop?
Well, I'd say normally I used to, when I used to train a bit more, I used to put them on a peg with a half a chain of lead and put a peg in the ground, and they can circle around it. And what I'd find with it, you call your dog out at the end of the tether, tell him to sit, and you just have a little stick there so you can tap him on the nose and say stay. And you walk a little bit away from him. He can't come because he's at the end of the collar. Then you can go out to the side of your circle, call him over to you because he can come on the round. The lead will let him come around there. And I found that was a good way of teaching them. But quite often I just take them out to the sheep, put them on sheep and lean on them a bit and expect them to start stopping.
Mm-hmm.
But it's a shortcut. Probably could do it the right way.
And what about sides?
Well, pegging them out on that lead. So all you need to do is go along tapping around behind them, tell them to get over, or whatever you want to use. the command, and you can get them. I just use come and here, and you can walk behind them, push them over, and then you can call them away or push them back the other ways, left or right, which can be done on a cord fairly easily. Or you do the other lazy way, just get some sheep on the fence, and you're out on one wing, and the dog's got the other side, and you can always call him back to you or send him round.
Mm-hmm.
Or when you're going up the fence, you can have him on the right, pushing the sheep. When you're coming back, you can have him on the left, and you can just get into the habit of calling him around as you go.
Yeah.
And did you used to split up a bit of dry work with a bit of stock work, or dry training?
Didn't do much dry training. Perhaps take a pup when I was going out to get the paper of a morning, walking out and sit him down, and I'd walk on another 20 or 30 metres, call him up. Because if you're doing that, firstly, you should always sit them down. If you walk off and leave them, always go back and give them a pat before you release them, because if you get the habit of calling them up first, they mightn't be as reliable to stay, but if they know you're coming back to give them a pat. And that's one way of teaching to stop and sit, until you get them good. After you get them better, well, a bit of practice, well, then you can ask them to come on, just come on when you want. But did read a book from the police dog training circle. That was quite interesting. One about how they train their dogs. They only train them 5 days a week, natural, because the trainer only works 5 days a week, so for 2 days off. And they started on different, like just even dog to lead. The first week, you take him for a walk. It doesn't matter where he is or what he does, and you give him 20 minutes or something like that, twice a day. And what you're supposed to do is then to bond with your dog, go somewhere quiet, sit down with your dog for 20 minutes after that exercise, and put him away. And do the same again in the afternoon. The next week you do that exercise. Instead of letting him be where he likes, you make him stay behind. So you just have a longer stick, just to keep him in behind you. Do that for a week. And the next week you make him heel. And it's just by adding to the thing as they go, ended up and doing the bonding thing every day, sitting with 20 minutes. I tried it with 3 dogs, pups I had at one time, but I found it taking too much time with 3 of them. But I could see the results that I was getting by doing it.
Yeah. And with cast is obviously quite important in the 3 sheep. If you can't get the cast, you can't do the rest of the trial. But what kind of casting action do you prefer?
I like a dog to cast onto his sheep, but when he sights them, to move out and give a bit of room.
Mm-hmm.
I don't like a dog just cast, well, in trials, cast a fence. I'm not that keen on. I like to see him cast onto the sheep. And I think it probably got a natural cast, really, but dogs that'll find the good casting ones. Some have got too much eye and they stop short. That can be, trained out if you get into it early, I think. But I've always looked for casting dogs, like paddock dogs, that'll cast out, give the sheep room at the far end.
Yep.
Just on that, you actually mentioned a good point there about dogs that cast on the sheep rather than dogs getting out on the fence. Do you want to elaborate on that for us a little bit, please?
Well, I suppose sometimes gathering sheep, you'd like a dog to go around the fence. But I just have more respect for a dog, especially in a free sheep on an oval, that's going to go around to where it ought to be, rather than, I know there's a lot of trainers I've seen at times, they train their dog to run around the fence, and when he gets to the other end, they tell him to sit down. I'd have thought a dog would pick that up pretty easy, to be a natural caster if you do any work with them.
Yeah.
And I like that. That's more of a... Sorry, you're right.
I think there's a bit of difference there in different dogs. I had a bitch once. When you sent her out because she's used to bush runs, a couple of 100 acres. She'd go out, and when she found the first lot of sheep, she'd stop, she'd approach them. As soon as she got them moving in, she'd go on another 100 yards, come in and push some sheep in, and she'd do that, and then she'd work back around the paddock again, always tucking them in as she went. But I don't know whether you'd ever train that. I think it's just something that dog had. I don't know where
Yeah.
it got it from or what it was.
That's a great trait to have.
Yeah. Did she ever
Yeah.
pass? Did you breed from her, and did she pass that on to any pups?
Well, I don't know. I didn't get that from any pups, no.
Yeah.
And did you breed many pups back in the day?
Probably bred a fair few pups. I was probably breeding 2 or 3 litters each year, whereas now I'm perhaps breeding a litter every 3 years.
Yep.
Yeah. And what did you like about breeding your own pups?
Oh, well, I think you got to know the dogs you had. Is, you know, the dogs, you knew what, you know, how hard you could be on them. You knew what they was going to go out and do. That's what I find when you go somewhere else, you find a dog. I had a dog once that I got in. He might have been by one of my dogs, but he never wanted to go to the head. And, you know, sort of, he'd work right along the back with you, but you couldn't get him to cast out behind out round the sheep to get to the head. And it's pretty hard to train a dog if you don't want to get to the front of him. But to get to the front of him, he's not much trouble. You can crack a stock whip or anything like that to make him stop and think. But, you know, if they don't want to go out, you can't. It's pretty hard to chase them out.
Yeah. It involves more effort too, trying to get out.
Well, that's it. I'm not as fast these days.
And do you have any opinion of, you know, a bitch has more, what's the word?
More to do with the pups.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's
I just had
yes. I had a total
I
mind
had a
blank
meltdown half. I knew what
Yeah.
you meant.
Yeah.
compared to the dog, or
That's pretty interesting. Sort of. I've always had a theory
yeah,
that the first litter from a bitch should be the best litter. I can't say that it's not all the time, and sometimes you find a bitch who's a real breeder, and whatever you put with her, whether it was a spaniel, it probably produced good workers. But on a general sort of thing, I've usually found I'd get the best pup out of the first litter, and quite often I've gone look to that pup all along the way. I still think, you know, you need to go to a fairly good dog, but if you've got a good bitch, you can get to a good dog. But if you've got a good dog, you mightn't get anywhere. So bitches are probably more valuable.
How did you go picking a dog for your bitches?
Depends what you've got. I've never, not so much like for like. Some people like to breed like for like. I've usually gone with a softer kind of bitch and put a harder dog there. Or sort of sometimes you might have a bit more eye or something like that. And I've probably gone that way by having like to have just a foolproof, nice bitch, sort of good temperament. She can be a bit plain. I don't need her to be, you know, you can get a bitch right on the ball and fiery and all that, but I'd rather just a plain bitch that does have the correct things and get working around sheep, gets to the head, and doesn't cause any trouble. And you know, that's what I've looked for most of the time.
yep. And do you have? I'm sorry. Do you have anything you want to put into your line moving forward, or you're pretty happy with where it is these days?
I'm too old to worry about going too much too forward. I've got a couple of pups there now. That is me for another 10 years, wouldn't it?
Speaking of, how do you pick a pup for yourself?
let somebody pick the rubbish out.
So
I think that's as good a way as any.
You don't have a secret handshake, or you're not looking for something different, or?
No, I haven't worried. Colour. I suppose I used to, at one stage, I was getting too many creamy pups. I'm not a believer in breeding creamy pups because the farmer gets them and he goes out to move 1,000 wethers. You've only got one creamy pup there, dog there. The wethers will nearly walk it out of a paddock, unless it's a very forceful dog. And yeah, I just think as a tool, they're probably better to be a black and tan or red and tan. So I started picking for the coloured ones to get away from there. It took me a couple of generations at the time. But
Yeah.
I don't think I see any cream ones now. Though some people are making breeding for cream, and I suppose just people, because they're different, people are wanting them. But I think they're probably a bad attribute to breed for. You're too easy to get litter after litter. It'll be all cream if you breed too much along that line. It could dominate a bit more.
Mm-hmm. And do you have any advice for someone wanting to purchase their first dog or pup?
Just look around fairly hard at the dogs people have got and what they've produced. I think nothing like having a look at the dogs. I think two people sort of read a bit about different ones and think they're champions. And I think the best shot's to go and have a look at someone that's doing the sort of work you're going to do.
Yeah. Beautiful advice.
Absolutely. So you mentioned earlier that you started yard trialing. That was over in Tassie?
Yeah, we ran the first yard dog trial in Tassie, and probably second. We ran one in 1980. That came about because we used to have a trial at Sellons at the time when I was there, and we used to run a farmer's trial with 3 sheep, which they never went very well at. And instead of having a 1 hour lunch while they ran that, we'd end up spending another hour chasing the sheep and getting it back together. So I decided perhaps instead of having to keep around after we have the farmer's trial, we'd have a yard trial. And the old farmer I used to work for, he used to say, one time, he's younger, when there was a bush work, old Lassie'd get him out in the bush in the boobiella and that, where your dog would never see him. So when I got my first Kelpie, she was pretty good gathering bit. Then he started saying, but she'd be no good in the yards. How old Matt or something in the yards would kill him, move a sheep through. So I thought, I knew I could beat him outside and beat him inside. I decided I'd put on the yard trial, so I got the use of a set of sheep yards. We developed the course and rules, and I selected an old truckie who was a bit interested in dogs to come along and judge it. And we put him in there, but we didn't get these old farmers there, but we got a lot of other people interested. And the next year, organised for Countrywide to come and film it. And that's what really set it off. Well, the first year too got set off because an 18-year-old girl won it, which was pretty good.
Wow.
Sort of, the first yard dog trial. She used to do work at the local sheep yards when I was penning up near Launceston at Clifford at the time. So she had this reasonable little dog, to do what you wanted. And at that time, we had a lot of jackaroos and come because of the crowd and the people nearby. Their dogs wouldn't work at all. And I said to them at the start, just take the sheep round, do what you got to do. And people were walking around to take the sheep round. But the next year they got a bit better and we got a few more come along and changed the course a little bit. But so a stockman out there, he used a free sheep trial as well. He was pretty good at free sheep, so he handled his dogs and he won it. But we had a chap from mainland, Greg Harris, over and judged it. And we sort of worked out some rules and set that out. And that went, after that, people saw it on the TV and ended up going over to Victoria and won at the Kilmore show. They ran the first one on the mainland. Then they went to South Australia, West Australia and New South got going. And Kilmore, when I ran the one over there, I wasn't very popular with the local free sheep trial people. They all come along and they're sitting up on the bank. Somebody intruding in their space, running a yard trial with different rules, and they come down to tell me, you can't do this and you can't do that, and dogs aren't allowed to do that. And I said, well, you just have to sit and watch. We're going to do it, because the people that come along weren't trialists, so they didn't have they couldn't threaten to ban us or rub us out. So we just went along, and took a little while, but they come to live with it after a few trials, I think.
So
Karen's asked, why do you think yard trialing has become so popular?
Well, because you can run it in a small area, local shows and all that, whereas the free sheep trial need the full arena, and shows tend to have their arena packed out with the grand parade and horses and all sorts of things. So
yes,
whereas they'll find a corner for a yard trial, and there's a lot of younger people. You go to a free sheep trial, perhaps someone decides he's got a dog and will do that, gets along at the free sheep trial and find that it's a lot more difficult than it looks to even hold on to the sheep, 3 crazy sheep, and they soon give up. They go to a yard trial, well, you got 10 or 12 sheep and it's doing what they're doing at home all the time. So I think they can get a better run at it, and people stay because of interest.
Yeah, beautiful. And do you have a favourite trial to participate in? One that you might do good at every year, or?
It's a while since I've done very good. I've always liked the state championships, their bigger trials. Mainland, Canberra was always a nice trial to go to. Molong, I found they were, I suppose it's going back 20, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. There's very interesting trials. You meet a lot of older people there. I remember when I was younger and going to Canberra there, young Jim Luce come along one day. I think he did a couple of years, sat on the fence watching it. And it was a couple of years later before I come back, and then I find he's out there competing. I was in the yard trials then, but yeah, Jim was used to be there, spending the day watching the dogs at Canberra. He was very interested. But while watching, apparently he was learning a fair bit too.
What do you think makes a good trial?
Makes
a good trial?
I suppose a good judge, good sheep. I don't mean pet sheep. You need a little bit in the sheep. And I suppose it's the way you let out the sheep. I've seen some trials where sheep are let out. I know somewhere I used to pile them onto a trailer behind a motorbike and race them out there and kick them off there, and you weren't sitting get a very good run. I didn't think that a lot of places that are letting out sheep good can make a fair bit of difference to your trial. But yeah, they're all enjoyable. I guess that probably more the people that are there that are enjoyable than the trial itself. I always go along, looking to win the trial or make money out of it. I suppose just it's an outing, or from here. Well, we used to go for a couple of weeks or 3 weeks, a month, and do some trials. It was always interesting to meet people again that you met other years and that.
Yeah.
And see the dogs, different dogs.
Yeah. And throughout those travels, is there something you've seen a lot of handlers struggle with, and where do you think they can improve?
I guess they probably struggle, if you say it, to be with free sheep trialling. I guess trying to improve on that needs to finding the better dogs. You can do a lot of, like I say, if you want to win the Melbourne Cup, you could train a draft horse for years. You're not going to go any better, are you?
No.
A bit of dogs, being able to pick your dog that'll suit. But that comes back that the beginners aren't very good at picking their dogs either. So
yeah.
So just when you were saying that, there was a sausage dog at the
Yeah.
door that didn't agree with you then. He was having a bit of a growl through the door. You're like, what is that? That's good, man. What do you feel was your best trialing achievement thus far? Quiet, Captain.
I don't know if there's any great achievements.
Or a special moment?
No, I don't know if there's been any special moments. There's sort of there's been enjoyable ones. It's nice to go land and do well in the trial. So the Kilby one can't be up among it to pick up a novice and be among them. I also went to one of the first Kilby trials where they started the yard work. I think that was in about 81 or 82. 82, I think Warrnambool was held. I think I had two dogs in the final there. Sort of that was when there weren't many. There's 50 dogs and there's only 3 or 4 people got out of the yards.
Yeah, wow.
The dogs weren't very good at that time. Where else have I been? I went to the Victorian time when they used to have a cast over 400 metres away. They used to have a sheep in a pen down there, which they wouldn't. They used the pen up, pull it over if your dog got about halfway down the ground. Otherwise, they wouldn't let the sheep out if you didn't get down the ground. I couldn't see whether my dogs got around them or not, but they did let the sheep out and had 3 dogs in it and got the 3-dog aggregate and plus the best cast lift and draw, or equal best cast lift and draw there that year. So that was when I was still working in post office, and people were saying to me, your dogs will be no good. You got to go that far. And there was a chap who was there, and Bill Marshall was there. He was because of those days. And Bill was saying, my dogs will be no good at this. They're only used to a small arena at home, which is apparently true. But what I was doing that day at the trial, before I'd run my dog, I'd go down there, and when Bill went and sent the dogs, I'd take my dog down to watch the dog go down the ground and let him see sheep come up the ground. I thought he'll learn the sheep down there if he keeps seeing sheep coming up the ground. And that proved to be all right because my dogs all went and got the sheep.
Yeah.
And that was a team of 3 Liscana dogs. That was Liscana Pace, Trixie and Ross.
That's awesome.
I haven't done a lot of 3 sheep trialing, but I've had that advice given to me, like when I'm out there, before you go and just run your dog, let them watch where the sheep are coming out from so they know which way to go. And they're not just running out there blind casting and maybe crossing you. Like at least they've got some kind of direction they might kick out to start with.
Yeah.
Mate, well, it's come to that time of night. Was there a question that stood out from one of our viewers tonight? And I'll win a bag of Enduro high energy food with real kangaroo meat.
Did someone ask me how to start a pup, was it? Where I was going to start him in the yard or paddock?
There was one about your ideal breaking in method for trialing.
Yeah.
Yep. That was Marty Campbell. If Marty, if you could get in contact with us, just your email address, phone number, and
a postal address.
Yeah.
We'll organise a bag of Enduro for you, mate. And Lance, there's also one coming your way for being a guest tonight.
All right. Thanks so much.
No, you're welcome, mate. Hopefully it feeds your dogs. Looks after your pack a little bit, mate. Is
there anyone you'd like to see on Dog Talk?
Well, have you ever had John Geddy on?
No, we haven't.
He's bred a lot of kelpies. And that's pretty knowledgeable.
Beautiful. We'll have to. Yep.
There you go. On the list. We'll see if we get hold of John.
One last question. Would you rather fight 1 duck the size of a horse or 20 horses the size of ducks?
Much fighters in all these horses or ducks. I think we'd take a one horse, one the
Yep.
size of a horse.
Beautiful.
And why would you take the one on, mate?
Oh, I don't think horses would be that bad, would they?
Oh, no, we'd find out.
I wouldn't like to see a dozen ducks buzzing around me. At least I could dodge
Let
one
alone
horse.
20 of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't like ducks.
Mate, thank you very much for your time tonight. Really appreciate you jumping on and have a chat with us.
Thank you, Dan, Laura.
No, thank
Very happy to
you.
be here.
It's been great.
And thanks to all our guests who tuned in tonight and everyone listening back. And please remember, we learn every day. And the day we stop learning from each other will be a sad one for all of us.
Thank you.
Thanks, Lance.
Thanks.